have a little quiz, and this is just by a show of hands. For this sentence, none of plants' cases are controlling, or none of plants' cases is controlling. How many say are? How many say is? All right, correct answer is. Doesn't sound right, right? So one of the big points to be made right off the bat here is we don't write the way that we talk, okay? Because I would imagine 100% of us would say none of plants' cases are controlling when we're talking. That's not grammatically correct in formal writing. So sometimes it's nice to make your writing sound like speech, but don't write the way you talk, okay? All right, next one. Neither of plants' claims are accurate, or neither of plants' claims is accurate. How many say are? How many say is? All right, I didn't catch anybody. It is. Now the reason for this is in both of these sentences, none and neither are the subjects of the sentence, and those are singular nouns. None is singular, neither is singular, so you get the singular conjugation of the verb. That's why it's is instead of are. So you're conjugating the verb to match the subject, all right? That's the reasoning behind the correct answer. All right, but page only cites one case, or but page cites only one case. How many say only cites? How many say cites only? All right, the correct answer is the law school answer, it depends. It depends on what it is you're trying to say, okay? The modifier only, it goes before the thing you're trying to focus on. So if what you're saying is Page only cites one case, he doesn't discuss it, he doesn't analyze it, he doesn't do anything else with it, he only cites it, then you want to say only cites. If you want to say it's the one that you're focusing on, Page cites only one case, not 3 cases or 5 cases, only one, then it's only, cites only. Right? The misplacement of only happens all the time everywhere. I've litigated a case involving a contract where the contract provision used the word only in the place that one party didn't want it to be. All right? So make sure you put only where you want it. Neither defendant nor plaintiffs is to blame, or neither defendant nor plaintiffs are to blame. How many say is? How many say are? Okay, as we go, this happens every time, fewer and fewer people are willing to raise their hand, right? So this is a trick question because we just did the none and neither thing up at the top, but in this sentence, neither is not the subject. In this sentence, we have it's a dual subject sentence. The subject is either defendant or plaintiffs. So when you have a dual subject like that, the verb gets conjugated in the tense that matches the subject that it's nearest to. So in this sentence, it's neither defendants nor plaintiffs are to blame, because plaintiffs are to blame is how you would say that without the first part of it, right? So the verb is closest to plaintiffs, so you conjugate it for plaintiffs. Sorry, I didn't mean to trick you guys. All right, is it ever okay to ask a judge, why are you talking? The answer to that question is no, but for grammar purposes, or this is really, strictly speaking, punctuation purposes, is it quotation mark, question mark? Or is it question mark, quotation mark? Or is it question mark, quotation mark, question mark? How many say the first one? How many say the second one? How many say the third one? It is technically the third one, okay? It looks absolutely bizarre. Okay, but you have a quoted question within a question. So technically, it should be question mark inside the quotation marks and then question mark. Don't ever write this, okay? Because everyone who looks at it will think that's wrong. That has to be wrong, right? It's not wrong, but it looks wrong. So just find a way to reword. If you have to write something like this, reword it somehow so that this is not the sentence you're writing, okay? Bonham recovered his just desserts. Is it 1 S? 2 S's? Most of you don't know and don't want to raise your hand. All right, the answer here is 1 S. It's just desserts with 1 S. 2 S's is the thing you eat after a meal, and that's not what we're talking about, okay? Just desserts is an archaic phrase or term. It comes from the same root as the word deserve. In other words, he got what he deserved, right? So when you get your just desserts, you're getting what you deserved. It's that same root word, and it's spelled with one S. Now, the point of this question is we all like to think we know what we're doing, and a lot of times we don't, right? So using an archaic colloquialism or idiom or something like this and not knowing what you're really doing, somebody somewhere will know. And so if you use it wrong, somebody reading that is going to know you used it wrong. So the problem here for all of us is we don't usually think we're wrong. We usually think we know what we're doing. So it's always good to have extra eyes reading. It's always good to double check. I think I know that this is with two S's, but maybe I should check because actually it's not. Just be sure you know what you're doing. I think there's one more. Yeah. We await Page's reply with bated breath. With an I or without an I? With an I? Without an I? Okay, it is without an I. This is another archaism. It comes, I think Shakespeare was maybe the first one to use it. But the bated is actually a truncated form of abated. And we all know what abated means, right? When you abate a case, it's like you stay the case. And so what is being said here is, I'm holding my breath, right? And we also get that other idiom that we use, like, I won't hold my breath. Well, that is like a stemming off of this archaism, which is waiting with bated breath, which means I'm abating my breath. I'm holding my breath. It doesn't mean bated breath like I have a worm on the end of my breath trying to catch, a fish or something. So again, it's the same point, right? You got to know what you're doing when you use certain terms or idioms or whatever. All right, fun's over for that. 3 things to consider for better writing. First one, this is we're going to zoom out here. This is, let's improve our writing from top to bottom. So this is from the top. We're like 10,000 foot view here. These are 3 things in a sort of big overarching way that we want to be thinking about if we want our writing to be better. The first one's audience. We should be thinking about who we're writing to. The second one is ethics and professional responsibility. I'm not going to have a lot to say about that, but I do have one slide about it. The third one is readability, and that's zooming back down into like the sentences and words and paragraphs and how do we make our writing more readable. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is just kind of an outline of what we're going to talk about. So on the audience stuff, audience is really about who you're writing to and why you're writing to them. We write differently depending on who we're writing to and why we're writing to them. So your audience, I'm assuming most everyone here is in the litigation. Compliance is I understand not exactly litigation, but okay. We're going to talk a lot about persuasive writing. I would make a very, I think, strong argument that all communication is a form of persuasive writing, even if I just tell you, hey, it's raining outside. I'm kind of trying to persuade you that it's raining outside. So I think most communication is persuasive. In litigation specifically, but in lots of other areas, your audience most of the time for legal writing is going to be the parties involved, right? That's your primary audience. Then there's going to be law people involved because the parties might not be the lawyers, right? A company is a party, but the lawyers, the law people involved might be in-house counsel, it might be the attorney, the outside counsel representing that party, or it might be the judge, right? The judge is one of the law people who you're writing to. So the law people is a little bit different audience from the party people. And then there's the people, because every time if you're in court, you file a document, it's a publicly filed document. It's a published document to the public, and the public can go read that stuff unless you're filing things under seal. And we like to think that the law is sort of for the people. So everything that we're filing does kind of have that audience. And one quick example for where you might be doing something in legal writing that is aimed a little bit more at audience number 3 rather than audience 1 or number 1 or number 2. If say in a Supreme Court case, your company wants to file an amicus brief in that case, right, to support one side or the other in that big Supreme Court case. A lot of amicus briefs are written more for the public, right, more to sort of stake out a position on a big case for the public and for the media to consume rather than for the parties of the case. So there are different times where we have a different audience for the different kinds of legal writing that we're doing. And then, of course, why you're writing it's to communicate and to persuade, but there are different ways we do that, right? So to give some illustration here, same audience, different purpose, your writing will change, right? So if my audience is my mom, and my purpose is I want to set some boundaries, right? Mom, you gotta quit coming over unannounced with luggage when we don't know you're coming, right? Like you're planning to stay, you gotta stop. The way I communicate to my mom for that purpose is different than if my purpose is I want money. Hey mom, how are you, right? Like my communication, how I communicate, how I persuade will be different. Same audience, but different purpose. So we want to be thinking about audience and purpose. Same thing goes if it's the same purpose, but a different audience. I might want to get money. If I'm writing to my mom to get money, that's going to look a lot different than if I'm writing to that foundation for a grant proposal because I want the foundation to grant me money, right? Same purpose, two different audiences, so two different forms of writing. So audience and purpose are sort of that 10,000 foot view of, how am I going to shape this? And this, of course, in the day-to-day sort of on-the-ground practice, we know this, right? This is why you all seek out local counsel who knows the judge, right? Because you want to know your audience. Every time you file something in that case with that judge, you want to know, what does this judge care about? What's going to persuade this judge? That's thinking about audience. All right, a note on persuasion. I assume everybody probably knows that the art of persuasion is known as rhetoric, right? The study of rhetoric, which is the art of communication, the art of persuasion. Does everybody know what a rhetorical question is? Someone tell me, what's a rhetorical question?
Implies the answer.
What did you say? No answer, or it implies the answer? Yeah. So we tend to think about a rhetorical question as like, I'm not expecting you to answer this, right? I'm going to ask this question, but you don't have to answer. That's sort of how in common usage we mean it, but that's not really what it means. A rhetorical question, the rhetoric is the art of persuasion, and when we ask a rhetorical question, the reason it's called a rhetorical question is because it is trying to do something. You're trying to persuade in some way by asking that question. So the implied answer is kind of behind what you're doing, right? So it's not that you don't expect an answer with a rhetorical question. You do expect an answer. You expect the reader to have an answer, but you expect the fact that they have that answer to be part of how you persuade them, right? So for example, if I just say, what's your favorite restaurant? That's not a rhetorical question. That's more of an inquisitive question. Like, I actually want to know, what your favorite restaurant is. But if I say something like, who would want a terrorist for a roommate, right? Well, I'm not expecting you to come up with someone who would want a terrorist for a roommate, right? I assume that the answer everyone has is nobody. Nobody would want that. So the reason I'm posing the question is probably because there's a point I'm trying to make. There's something I'm trying to persuade you of, and that's what makes it a rhetorical question. So the study of rhetoric goes back to like Aristotle and all that Greek stuff. So the words that they still use involve Greek words. And there's three kinds of modes. This is, again, thinking from a 10,000 foot level, what's your toolbox for better persuasive writing? And you want to be sure that you're using all the tools you can use depending on your audience and your purpose. So one of the modes of persuasion is logos. This is logic, this is reasoning, right? Making good, sound arguments. Does everybody know the difference between valid arguments and sound arguments? Or maybe I should say, who does not know the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument? Nobody's going to admit this. So a valid argument is a logical argument, right? All stop signs are red. This is a stop sign, therefore this sign must be red. That's a valid argument, right? Also a valid argument is all dogs are blue. This is a dog, therefore this dog must be blue. That is also an equally valid argument. The difference between them is the truthfulness of the premises, right? So it is true that all stop signs are red, at least in the US. So that argument is valid and sound. all dogs are blue, this is a dog, therefore this dog must be blue, that's a valid argument. It's not sound because you could challenge the truthfulness of the premises pretty easily. Not all dogs are blue, right? So what you want in using logos, good argument, logic as a way of persuading, is you want sound arguments, obviously. The more susceptible to challenge your argument might be, the less sound it probably is. All right. Pathos is related to emotion. You probably recognize the Greek root word. It's related to the words like empathy, sympathy, pathetic. It has to do with emotion or feeling. This is where we sometimes use a lot of storytelling, right? Storytelling can generate an emotional response that a logical argument doesn't generate. So, if you're in that big case where you can tell a story that makes it sound like this is David versus Goliath, the little guy versus the big evil, corporation or government or whatever, that storytelling that's using pathos as a persuasive tool. Ethos, again, you'll probably recognize the root. This is related to the word ethics. It has to do with authority, trustworthiness, credibility. This is another tool. In legal writing, the easiest example of ethos is, we cite cases, we cite statutes, we cite authority because that means something, and authority can be persuasive. But it's also in other ways, like, for example, the jury likes your lawyer better than the other side's lawyer. And the reason they like your lawyer better than the other side's lawyer is your lawyer seems trustworthy and credible, and the other side's lawyer seems shifty and untrustworthy. That's an ethos sort of thing at work, right? You're persuading through ethos. There's no logic or pathos. There's some overlap. Sometimes there might be some pathos. Maybe they like your lawyer better because they're better looking than the other lawyer or something like that. That's not really ethos. But so sometimes these things will get blurry and fuzzy. But you want to think about these three modes of persuasion again in that sort of 10,000-foot view of how do I make my writing better. How can I use these tools? Every paragraph, every section, you should be trying to draw on one or more of these tools in your persuasive efforts. All right. Good writers change how they use these tools depending on audience and purpose. That's sort of, you get that. All right, so a quick exercise on how we use pathos in our writing. So this is a story. This is a one-sentence story. You are decision makers, and you have to pick a side. And this is the story you've been told. The man struck the girl. How many of you are on the man's side? How many of you are on the girl's side? Okay, good. If you're on the man's side, I'm glad you didn't raise your hand. It's fairly self-explanatory. The verb struck carries some emotional weight to it. The noun man sounds older and in a position of power than the noun girl, which sounds younger and probably in a position of less power than the man. And we tend emotionally to react to someone who's in a position of power striking people who are not in a position of power. That's just an emotional response that's pretty normal. All right, so we had 100% people on the girl's side. Here's another story. The parent spanked the child. Again, you're a decision maker. You got to pick a side. Who's on the parent side? Who's on the child's side? Who's like, I don't know. Yeah, I need more information. That's what everyone always is like, I need to know, like, what did the kid do? So kind of split for obvious reasons. All right, last story. The guard subdued the thief. How many are on the guard side? How many are on the thief's side? This will be interesting. One person. Okay. You're a criminal defense attorney. So the point of this exercise is, first of all, in your writing, you don't need flowery adjectives and adverbs, okay? Pick good nouns and good verbs, and then you don't need the extra stuff because you can be persuasive without the extra stuff. That's one point to be made here. The second point is if you look at the first column, the subject of every sentence, man, parent, guard, right? In the first sentence, nobody was on the man's side. In the last sentence, everyone was on the guard's side except for the criminal defense attorney. In the second column, which is the object of the sentence, girl, child, thief, everyone was on the girl's side. And then in the third sentence, No one's on the thief's side, except, that guy. And then in the middle sentence, everyone's kind of split. We want to know more. Now, imagine one of those little trinket jewelry stores at the mall. I don't know what they're called, but they have earrings and bracelets and stuff. And 12-year-old girl goes in with her friends. She stuffs some stuff in her pockets. She's leaving. Store calls the security guard. Security guard goes rushing down to the jewelry store. The girls are just coming out of it as he gets there. He grabs the 12-year-old girl, notices upon grabbing her, it's his daughter, gives her a swift swat to the rear because he's just caught his daughter shoplifting. And we have 3 different stories describing the exact same story. Okay? I got you all to switch sides based on the words I chose. And none of this is inaccurate, right? That's the power of pathos and storytelling, because nouns and verbs can persuade you to switch sides, right? Every journalist knows this. Every good lawyer knows this. So this little pathos exercise is a good way to remind us that, hey, there's a lot of things we can do here besides citing cases and making logical arguments. Your facts section in every brief and every motion that you file can do a lot of work, a lot of persuasive work with storytelling and word choice. How do you, what's the name that you're going to use for your opposing party? What's the name you're going to use for your own party? Naming things can make a big difference. All right, moving on. This is my quick note about ethics and professional responsibility. Just don't misrepresent stuff, right? Like in that last example, none of that was misrepresentative. There's some spin, clearly, going on, depending on which side you're on. As long as you don't misrepresent anything, that's okay. You got to be careful with how far you spin things. And it's not just because there are rules and you might get in trouble and all that kind of stuff. It's also because it's part of your persuasion, right? Ethics is ethos, and one of your persuasive tools is being trustworthy and credible and authoritative. So don't misrepresent stuff, because you will lose that trustworthiness and credibility with the court or with the jury or with somebody in your audience, and that will hurt your persuasiveness. So that's my pitch about ethics. You want credibility, you want trustworthiness. It's part of how you persuade. All right, now we're going to get down into more of the nitty-gritty about improving your writing, on sort of a word-by-word, sentence-by-sentence sort of level. Readability is a term that gets used. So first of all, I'll say real quickly, good writing is both art and science. The art piece is hard to teach. Some people just seem to have a sense of voice or style in their writing, and they just seem to be better writers. And that's a hard thing to teach, but I will say you can learn it. The best advice I have for trying to improve your writing in more of a artistic way is find really good writing that you think is really good, like I wish I could write like that, and then literally copy it. And what I mean by that is put that piece of writing that you think is really good and type out word for word, copy that whole story, brief, whatever it is that you want to emulate. Don't do it like a typist who's just mindlessly, can type 90 words a minute without even knowing what the words are. Don't do it like that. Think through the words, word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and copy it out. And that will start to help you internalize the rhythm, the word choice, how this sentence comes after this sentence, this paragraph comes after this paragraph transitions into this paragraph. You'll internalize that by just copying good writing. I have done it. I'm telling you, it works. And it's a way to learn style and tone and voice that is hard to teach otherwise. That's all I can really tell you about the art of writing. The science of writing, though, this is a literal science. They study this, okay? The way they will study readability, and what readability means, it refers to how easy it is to read the text that's being studied. And they will they'll have subjects who read the text and then answer questions afterwards, and the questions afterwards have to do with comprehension and retention and stuff like that. But it's not just that, because that could get a little subjective. They will actually hook these people up to machines, and they'll have monitor stuff pointed at their eyes, and they will measure how hard their eye works, how quickly their eye how quickly their eye moves across the page and how hard their eye is working to read the text that they're reading. And then they'll ask these questions about comprehension and retention. And what they find is that the easier it is for the person reading the text to read the text, the easier the eye moves across the page, the better their comprehension and retention, okay? Because what happens is if they have to go back and reread a sentence, it's probably because they didn't understand it, right? So there's a real scientific study of readability that actually shows if you make your writing more readable, people will understand it better, they will retain it better, and of course both of those things go toward being persuaded by it. You have a much better chance of persuading the judge who remembers your brief than the person who filed the brief the judge can't remember, right? So what we want to do is make our writing more readable to improve our chances of communicating and persuading. The way we do this, the science says, first of all, everything shorter. Shorter words. That means if you've got a 4-syllable word, but you could use a 1-syllable word, use the 1-syllable word. Now, sometimes the 4-syllable word is unavoidable. That's fine. But if you can use the shorter word, use the shorter word. Shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs, shorter briefs, everything shorter. Fewer words is not the same as shorter, although it will help with shorter. Your sentence will be shorter if you use fewer words. But what I mean by fewer words is fewer words to say the same thing, right? So in light of the fact that so-and-so did such and such, can be because so-and-so did such and such, and you did the exact same thing. But you did it with because instead of in light of the fact that. So fewer words is more readable, it's better, and it will shorten your sentences. So look for ways to cut words. Like we just talked about a minute ago, cut adverbs and adjectives. That's usually by focusing on better verbs, better nouns. And then another thing is contractions. Everybody in here, I am guessing, is allergic to contractions. We have this idea, it's conventional wisdom, that contractions are informal and you don't use contractions in formal writing, and it's baloney. Contractions have been used in formal writing for centuries. Somehow, a few decades ago, I don't know where, somewhere along the way, someone decided that's too informal and we shouldn't do that. I'm telling you, it's okay. Now, like any other tool, don't overuse it. Don't have contractions in every sentence, but it's okay to use contractions. Sometimes for the rhythm or the voice, it's better. And it will shorten things. So don't be afraid of contractions. Use sections. One big thing about readability is breaking everything into more consumable chunks. And so if you break your brief or your motion or your contract or your whatever it is that you're doing, if you break it into more consumable chunks by breaking it into smaller sections, and then use headings, preferably descriptive headings, that makes it more consumable, more readable for the reader, for whoever your audience is. One quick word about numbering sections. Someone somewhere who I'd like to have a conversation with decided somewhere along the way that the way we should number things in our legal writing in motions and briefs is with capital Roman numeral I, and then Roman numeral II, and then Roman numeral III. And then your subsections are capital A, capital B, capital C. And so now if I'm on page 30 and I look up and I'm in subsection B, I don't know what section, is this subsection B of section III, or is this section 4? I don't know, right? I'm a big advocate of what's called scientific numbering. In scientific writing, they will use a numbering system where you have section 1, and it's just a normal 1. It's like the 1 we use all the time. It's not the Roman numeral stuff, it's just a 1. Section 1, and then subsection 1.1, subsection 1.2. And so if I'm in page 32 and I'm in section 2.3.1, I know exactly where I am. I'm in main section 2, subsection 3, subsection 1, right? I use, unless someone more important than me or just bigger than me overrules my effort to use this numbering, I use it in all my filings. Strongly recommend scientific numbering. It's much easier on your reader. That's my quick word about numbering. But at least use headings. At least use descriptive headings. Break stuff into smaller sections, more consumable chunks. It's much more easier to read, and that will improve your persuasiveness. Last thing is better typography. typography just refers to how your writing looks on the page. It's not the writing itself, but how it looks. We'll talk about that in a minute because it's one of the easiest things you can do to improve readability, but we'll get to that. All right, strategies for shortening. First, what I have here is an image. This takes 30 seconds to find something like this on Google or whatever search engine you're using. This is just like a list of wordy phrases that can be replaced by 1 or 2 word phrases. So like the in light of the fact that could be because. You can just do a quick Google search and you'll find these kinds of lists out there. I recommend you get one. What I recommend is figure out what we all have writing tics, right? Certain things that we just do that all the time. I start way too many sentences with and, which by the way you can do, but you shouldn't do it too many times. I tend to do it more than I should. You can start sentences with but or and, but don't overdo it. So I have to go through when I'm editing, and I'll cut out some of those ands at the beginning of some of my sentences. That's just one of my tics. We should all try to learn what our writing tics are and then compensate for them, right? Correct for them. Some of us have some of these wordy tics, right? In light of the fact that just might be one of the things that you just say all the time for whatever reason. You grew up, your mom said in light of the fact that all the time, and so that's just what you learn to say. If that's one of your tics, try to correct for it in your editing by replacing it with something shorter. Like I said, these lists are easy to find. That's one way to shorten, is just go through. And by the way, Control F is your friend, right? Everybody knows Control F. In every document, use Control F to find stuff like this and then replace it with something better. All right, eliminate false subjects. False subjects are like this. There are 3 reasons why this won't work. What's the subject of that sentence? Well, there. There are. The verb are is the verb, but what's doing the are? There is. That's not a real subject. It's a false subject. It's much better to just say this won't work for 3 reasons. Okay? It's shorter, and you eliminate the false subject of there are, right? Again, Control F. You can Control F for there are, or there. Just Control F for there, because there's other situations where we use words like there or that. There are situations where we use those kinds of words where you probably can fix that. It's probably an extra word or maybe even a couple extra words where you can cut that. Eliminate passive voice unless it's purposeful. Everybody's heard about passive voice all the time. There are good reasons to use it. So if you guys are all mad at me and you're telling me I did a bunch of wrong stuff and I say, mistakes were made. The reason I use that passive voice is to take attention away from the subject by eliminating it. The subject of the sentence is me. I made mistakes. But I want to take some focus away from the subject, so I'm going to say mistakes were made. Who made the mistakes? I don't know. Ask the sentence. The sentence just said mistakes were made. So there are reasons for passive voice sometimes. You might have strategic rhetorical reasons for using passive voice. If you do, great, use it. If you don't have a rhetorical reason for using passive voice, that's when you should not be using it. It's always longer than the active voice and less punchy. So the task was completed by 2 teams. There's no reason to take attention away from the subject because the subject here is actually the 2 teams. So just move it around and say 2 teams completed the task. Much punchier, shorter, better. That's one way to improve. Shorter, punchier words. This is what I was saying about the 4-syllable word versus the 1-syllable word. The meeting in regards to or the meeting concerning can just be the meeting about. About's shorter, punchier, better. Always use whatever's shorter if possible. Sometimes you can't avoid the longer stuff, but if possible. Eliminate unnecessary clutter. Please don't do this. I am on a crusade against unnecessary parentheticals. And I don't mean parenthetical descriptions of a case. Like if you cite a case and you want to have a parenthetical about what the case says that's relevant to what you're arguing, that's great. Those parentheticals are great. These parentheticals are terrible. You should only use a parenthetical that re-identifies a party if there's going to be some confusion about who you're talking about. But I don't think anyone else in this case is going to be named Baraka. And there's no reason that anyone's going to be confused if later I say Baraka, they're not going to think I meant Chase Bank. right? Don't re-identify someone with a parenthetical unless there's some possibility of confusion. It's just unnecessary clutter. Now, I realize in contracts, sometimes there's a real reason in a contract that you need to do that for, technical contract reasons. I get that. That's different. I'm talking about non-contractual documents. Even in contracts, though, don't do this. Okay? I have litigated a case where someone changed one of the numbers and didn't change the other one. Okay? Don't do this, even in a contract. You can just say the word 5. You don't have to put 5, the numeral, in parentheses. Just don't do it. It's unnecessary clutter, and it opens you up to possible mistakes because somebody will change one and not the other. Don't cite 3 cases when 1 case will do, that kind of stuff. Unnecessary repetitiveness. Cut that stuff out. Cut that kind of clutter out. Shorten, tighten, always. All right. Now, by the way, on citing cases, there are going to be situations, obviously. If I'm writing a cert petition to the Supreme Court and I got to say, look, there's a circuit split about this issue, I'm going to cite, here are all the circuits on one side of this issue. Here are all the circuits on the other side of this issue. I have to cite those multiple cases to show that that's where the circuit split is. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about, like, if I just say, you got to prove that there's a duty here, I can just cite 1 case that you have to have a duty, right? I don't need 4 cases saying there needs to be a duty. Okay, seriously, contractions, it's okay. You'll be all right. This is a Supreme Court opinion, a relatively recent Supreme Court opinion. It's using contractions. This is by Justice Kagan. If Justice Kagan can do this in a Supreme Court opinion, I promise you'll be okay in the motion that you filed or the whatever document you've drafted. If you use a contraction, nobody will sanction you. If you think Justice Kagan, she's kind of edgy, right? She's like young, hip justice who will do the edgy things like use contractions. Here's Justice Alito. Justice Alito's not the young and edgy justice on the Supreme Court. Of all the Supreme Court justices as writers, he's the most formal. I mean, this is no disrespect to Justice Alito, but he's the stodgiest writer on the court. And he still uses contractions sometimes. So it'll be okay. And if you think, this is just a new thing that the new justices are doing. Nope. Here's another Supreme Court opinion from 1961. Justice Frankfurter using contractions. It's okay. You can use contractions, I promise. If someone gets mad at you, tell them to email me. All right, typography. Typography, like I said, is how it looks on the page. So more white space is a big thing that will improve readability. Again, this is the science, right? The studies show more white space improves readability. What that means is things like, if you can do it, if the rules don't prohibit it, use bigger margins. The science says that the optimal line spacing between lines is about 1.5, not 2. So we double space everything, and if the rules require that, then you have to double space it. But if you don't have a rule that's governing what you're doing, 1.5 spacing is, the science says, it's more readable. So what that means, and hopefully most of you sort of know this, if your font size is 12, then double spacing, so Microsoft Word, which is probably what most of us use, its default double space is not a true double space. It's actually more space than a real true double space. True double space, if you have a 12-point font, would be 24 point between lines, right? Because 24 is double from 12. So you can go in and set your line spacing. It is actually better for your audience, it's more readable, to have less space between those lines. So if the rules call for double spacing, it is okay to set your double spacing at 24 point, because that is double space for a 12-point font, 28 for a 14-point font. Set your double spacing at the actual double spacing, because it will be slightly less than the default double space that Microsoft has in there, and that's better. It's more readable. 1.5 spacing, if you can get away with that, the rules don't require double, then if it's a 12-point font, you would set your spacing at 18 point, right? That's 1.5, 12. I'm telling you, it's science. And you can just, whoever says, why are we doing this? You say, science, science. The other thing with typography is things like visuals. All right, so to give you an example of this in real world, real practice, right? Here's a couple paragraphs. Now, without changing a single anything, without changing a single word, a single punctuation mark, nothing. I don't have to change anything about the content of this. I can make it way more readable with a number of changes, and these are just typographical changes. First of all, the justified margins that you see in the example on the left, it looks real pretty and boxy, but it's way harder to read, okay? The reason behind that is in order to have justified margins, the program has to spread the words. The spacing between the words varies in order to get the justified margin. Now, what the science says is your eye has to work harder to read across a line where the space between the words is varying, okay? If the space between the words is consistent, your eye doesn't have to work as hard. So ragged margin on the right-hand side is better for readability. Now, if you just really like the boxy look of the justified margins, or maybe you're in a court where they require justified margins, I'm not sure if there's a court that does that, but maybe there is, then I strongly recommend you turn on the automatic hyphen function so that at the very least, in creating the justified margin, it can hyphenate certain words to try to regulate the spacing between the words as much as possible. But what you want is consistent spacing because it's more readable. But setting aside the hyphenating and stuff like that, if I make the margin ragged, that's one way. It makes it more readable in terms of spacing. It also creates more white space. The reason more white space makes a document more readable is it creates more rest space for your eye, basically. You end up with shorter lines, for example. Your eye doesn't have to travel quite as far across the line. Another change here is in the second paragraph of the example. There's this list of elements in this, I think this is a premises liability claim. So there's the elements of the claim, right? In the first example, they're all in the body of the paragraph. In the second example, I just broke them out into a list, right? Use lists. Use numbered lists, use bulleted lists. Lists are your friend. They create white space, they create more consumable bits of information because each element of the list becomes its own thing that you're consuming one at a time instead of everything being drowned in the body of a big paragraph. So create a list anytime you have an opportunity to create a list. It's more readable. The other change that I'll point out is at the bottom of the second paragraph of the new example, you'll see there's a couple words that I used bold for emphasis. Okay, I'm also a big advocate of bold for emphasis instead of italics. The reason for this is we use italics for a bunch of other things. We use italics for the titles of cases, titles of books, foreign words sometimes. So to avoid confusing the italics for some other thing and knowing for sure that what you're doing is emphasizing and not italicizing for other reasons, use bold for emphasis instead of italics. We already do this in, like, for example, headings. When you bold a heading, the reason you're bolding it is you're emphasizing this is a heading and not part of the main body of the document. So we use bold for emphasis already in certain contexts. We have not gotten to where we use it in the bodies of paragraphs very much. I think we should. And another reason for this is you should use typography for emphasis as little as possible. You should use syntax, you should use rhythm, other things. If you want to emphasize something, put it at the beginning or the end of a sentence, of a paragraph, of a wherever. The beginnings and the endings are where we tend to put emphasis in our head. So if you want to emphasize something, have it be at the end of the sentence before the period. That's going to get the emphasis. Yeah?
As an elder person, italics are hard to read because it looks like it's lighter than the regular font.
Yeah.
So bold really is, it's like your eyes go right to it.
Which is another excellent reason to not use italics for emphasis. Some fonts, and by the way, I'm not going to get into my font diatribe because we don't have the time, but use a good font. Some fonts are terrible with their italics. So pick a font that is really good and readable and professional looking in every iteration that it appears in bold, in italics, in whatever. Sometimes you'll get a font and it's great except for there's a section symbol, and the section symbol looks terrible in that font, and you happen to be dealing with a case that's got a bunch of statutes and regulations where you're going to be using the section symbol over and over again, and it's got this cartoonish gargantuan section symbol or something. So pick a different font. But that's another good reason not to use italics for emphasis. Like I said, you should use typography for emphasis as little as possible, and one of the benefits of using bold for emphasis is it stands out on the page, and if you get to when you're doing your revisions and you get to a page and there's just bold all over it, I need to like not use typography on that page for emphasis quite so much. If you're using italics, you won't catch that as easily, and then you're just using italics all the time. So if you use bold for emphasis, it's better for a bunch of reasons, and you'll use it less, which is good. All right, I think that's all I have on the typography stuff there. As far as visuals, don't be afraid to use visuals in any kind of legal document. This is a case involving a lease dispute where one of the provisions was you can't make material changes to the building without prior approval, okay? I could spend several paragraphs, maybe even a couple pages, trying to describe all the changes that were made on the building here, but that's going to be a lot of writing and a lot of work, and it's still going to be hard for the reader to really visualize what it is we're talking about. But if I just drop this in here and say, look, here are the changes. Now let's talk about whether these were material changes. That is way more effective than trying to describe all the changes with writing. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words for a reason. That became a cliche for a reason, right? So use them. Use visuals of all kinds. You can use pie charts, all kinds of stuff like that. It's another thing to consider is your audience. Different people learn differently. Different people have different ways of consuming information, and some people are more visual than verbal. So images or visuals of some kind will work better and be more persuasive for some people in your audience than the verbal words you're using in your paragraphs. So be sure to use visuals whenever the thing you're dealing with calls for it. Another way to use visuals is something like this. We had a case that involved a lot of really complicated issues, and this was just basically a roadmap. And we just basically provided for the court a roadmap for, look, if you decide this issue this way, then here's what comes next. And if you decide that issue this way, here's what comes next. And walking the court through what kind of analysis the court's going to have to do in order to get to the conclusion that it's going to get to, regardless of what conclusion it gets to. Now, of course, we did build this in a way where most of the answers go our way, but it still was a roadmap for how you're going to get to wherever you're going to get, and the one at the very bottom is the one where we lose. But otherwise, here's your roadmap. We got through the grapevine, we heard that this was a case at the Texas Supreme Court, multiple justices and all the clerks were very happy that we had provided this. We later, after the case was over, we got word through the grapevine that they were very appreciative of this roadmap. It's because it made it a lot easier to understand, right? So don't be afraid to think outside the box. You don't just have to do everything in paragraphs the way we always do it. Think about what's going to be most persuasive, what's going to make things clear and understandable, comprehensible for your reader, whoever your audience is. All right, that's all I have. I think we have, I don't remember what time we're supposed to end, but maybe a few minutes for questions? My opinion on all caps? In agreements. So, my opinion, I'm going to leave off the in agreements for a second. My opinion about all caps is never do it, okay? All the studies show reading all caps is really hard. Now, some people insist that because of tradition, we put headings in all caps, especially like, the heading that says argument. Let's just put that in all caps. Okay, one word or a couple words is fine if you have to. If that's your addiction, then go for it. Otherwise, I would say never do all caps. It's just harder to read. In agreements, it depends on the law, right? There are some jurisdictions in some states or in some places where you might actually have a legal requirement to put certain kinds of provisions in some kind of emphasized way, and it might even require it to be in all caps. If you just got to find out, like, what do I really have to do here? If you have to put it in all caps because there's something that requires you to do it, then obviously you got to do that. But my opinion is, whenever it's avoidable, avoid it, because it's just a lot harder to read.
What about shall? Shall?
Oh, shall, yeah. Same, avoid it. If it's possible to say will or must, will is going to mean more like this is something you have to do in the future. Must means you must do this. The problem with shall is it can mean either one of those things. Shall can mean this is something I will do in the future, or it shall can mean this is something I must do. So it's better to use will or must for what you really mean, rather than shall, which can be a little ambiguous.
What is your thoughts on article usage?
What do you mean by article usage? Like the?
Yes, I have Grammarly, and it is always scolding me for not using articles.
So my guess is that there are certain contexts, and it might be in legal writing in general, or maybe the area of legal writing that you're working in, where the convention is to not use the article, and so the Grammarly, the conventional grammar doesn't fit with the convention of the context you're working in. So the most important thing for good writing always is context. When we're talking about audience and purpose, that's part of your context. When we're talking about what words to use, what's the best word, that's always going to depend on the context. So I would say if the way people do it in your area that you're working in is to not use the article, then don't listen to Grammarly that's telling you to use the article, because that's not applicable to your context. But without having like a more specific example of whether that's right or wrong, I mean, that's the other thing about good writing. There's a lot about it that's not right or wrong. It's effective versus ineffective, right? So like even the quiz things at the very beginning about, neither being, or the verb is being conjugated is for neither. That is the grammatically correct way to do it, but in certain contexts, you're going to sound weird doing that, right? Like in conversation, for example, we talk differently than we write. So in the context of conversation, if you say that, everyone's going to immediately know you're a grammar Nazi, and they're going to avoid you, and you'll have no friends, and your career will tank. So always just think about what's good for what's effective for the context.
Do you drop a footnote to explain scientific numbering, and/or have you ever received pushback on it?
I don't drop a footnote. It's pretty self-explanatory once you'll see right away on the table of contents how everything's numbered. So I don't drop a footnote. The pushback I've only ever gotten has been from the old guard that feels like this is the way we do things, and this is how we're going to do things. And I got most of that pushback when I was a younger associate. Not ever from a court. No, never gotten any pushback from any. In fact, I've had some judges outside of a case that I'm actually handling before them. I've had some judges who have said that they do prefer that. So I've never gotten negative reaction. The only negative response was when I was a younger associate, and I got older partners who said, "We don't do that. What are you doing? This newfangled thing, you crazy radical." So, any other questions? Oh, yeah.
So what is your opinion about dropping all the case citations and footnotes to make it more readable? That was very popular for a while. Some kids got into it. I saw in your examples you had the citations actually in the paragraphs themselves.
Yeah, so there was a big debate over that for a while. And what happened is iPads. So as more and more judges started reading briefing on an electronic device, a consensus began to develop that it kind of sucks to have to scroll down to the bottom and then scroll back up in order to see the footnoted citations. So it's not actually more readable, because judges do actually care about what cases you're citing. They want to know what authority you're relying on. And I think the general consensus now, because most judges now are reading briefs on an iPad or some, a Kindle or some form of electronic device, having them in the body is now, I think, generally the preferred way of doing it. Now, Brian Garner and some of his, real devoted followers, I love Brian Garner. He's got tons of good things to say, but this is one thing where I have disagreed with him directly about it, and we've had some choice words with each other about it. Friendly. It's all been friendly. But we don't agree. He does still think that footnotes is better for citations. But I think that these days it's really better to have them in the body. And I think my sense of the consensus among judges is that they prefer it in the body, because then they don't have to go down to the bottom and back up to the top again on the iPad. So, any other questions?
What is your preferred font?
Anything but Times New Roman. Just show that I think that good writers think about every decision they make. And if you have Times New Roman, what that signals to anyone who's paying any kind of attention is you didn't think about that. You just use the default font. And of course, now I think the default font on Microsoft Word is Calibri or something like that. Never use Calibri on your briefing or your motions. I don't know why they changed I think it's because it's easier to read online. So if you know fonts, there's serifs and sans serifs. The serif font has the little tiny wings at the edges, and sans serif doesn't have those little wings. Sans is the French or Latin for without. So online, on a screen, some studies will suggest that the sans serif fonts are easier to read on a screen. But other studies will suggest that the longer your document is, the easier it is to read with the serif fonts because the little wings actually help your eye move from letter to letter and word to word. So for us, writing motions and briefs, a longer document, that means a serif font is better. And Calibri is a sans serif font. I think it's the new default font because online writing is a bigger thing now, and it's supposed to be easier online. But that's because you're reading a short little web page, a smaller piece of text. So I would just use, the Supreme Court uses the Century family of fonts, requires the Century family. So for all federal court filings, I usually use Century School Book or something like that. I figure if it's good enough for the Supreme Court, it's good enough for whatever federal court stuff I'm doing. But there's a lot of others. I mean, a lot of people like Garamond. Garamond is one of those that has really bad italics, though, so I'd be careful about that one. Georgia is a popular font that's a nice professional-looking font. Palatino is another good one. Equity is a font that's very popular here in Texas. A lot of the Texas justices at both the Courts of Appeals and the Supreme Court in Texas, they like Equity. The problem with Equity is it's not free like a lot of the other ones. Somebody somewhere has to have a license for it. That might be cost prohibitive depending on how and where you're practicing. But any other questions? All right, thank you.